My name is Michael McFall. I'm the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies. Thank you for joining us today in our final seminar of this quarter's FSI Summer Seminar Series. Today's event is titled Intelligence and the National Security Enterprise, How Information and Insights are Provided to the President and Senior Officials. Tom, if I'm not mistaken, I think this may have been prodded by the debate about intelligence and what the president knew and did not know about alleged Russian bounties to the Taliban in Afghanistan, but it led then to a larger discussion, and you rightfully said we should have a bigger discussion about how this process works. And so that's what we're going to do today. We have two fantastic people to discuss this with us. Professor Amy Zegard is a senior fellow here at FSI. She's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and professor in political science by courtesy. She served in the Clinton administration National Security Council and as a foreign policy advisor to the Bush-Cheney 2020 presidential campaign. She's also currently a contributing editor to The Atlantic. I highly recommend getting her column. She is tremendously prolific, has written all kinds of books. But as I was just joking with her now, she also, I think, is one of the most talented title writers for books and articles. And let me just give you a flavor. Her last book was called Bites, Bombs, and Spies, The Strategic Dimensions of Offensive Cyber Operations, co-edited with Herb Lynn. She wrote with Condoleezza Rice, Political Risks, How Businesses and Organizations Can Anticipate Global Insecurity. Okay, Amy, that one's not so exciting. But these other two are great. Spying Blind, the CIA, the FBI, and the Origins of 9/11, and Flawed by Design, the Evolution of the CIA, JCS, and NSC. Dr. Tom Finger is also a senior fellow here at FSI, resides primarily in APARC, but has lots of interests stretching throughout the various centers here at FSI. He was previously the Deputy Director for National Intelligence for Analysis, and concurrently was the chair of the NIC, the National Intelligence Council, from 2005 to 2008. He was in charge of the President's Daily Brief from 2005 to 2008, as well as other analytic products for the Secretary of State that I think he'll talk about here. Tom has a long list of books and experience in the government. I won't go through them all, but just highlight a few. He also served as Assistant Secretary for INR, as it's called in the State Department, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Analysis, Director of Office and Analysis for East Asia, and head of the China Division back in '86 and '89. Deep experience with this topic. I think what our plan here is for Tom to briefly introduce the subject and go in whatever direction he wants. And then I think Amy will ask some questions and hopefully say some things herself. She also is writing a new book on related matters. And then they'll turn it over for Q&A to you. When we open it up to Q&A to the audience, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screens to submit your questions. We will get to as many of them as we can. Before I hand it over to Amy and Tom, I'd just like to say thank you for everybody who's joined us over the course of this series. We're going to take a bit of a hiatus over the next 4 weeks, but we'll be back at the beginning of the fall quarter. And we look forward to your suggestions for new ideas and topics for this seminar series. And always, please, as follow-up, go to our website, fsi.stanford.edu, to find previous webinars and previous podcasts, as well as commentary and analysis from all of our fellows, including Amy and Tom. And with that, let me turn it over to Tom. Take it away, folks.
Good. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Amy, for agreeing to moderate and to pose questions for me. The talk I want to do today is motivated by what I regard as dismayingly misleading commentary about the way in which the intelligence community supports the national security enterprise. Over the last several weeks, as Mike indicated, keyed to the alleged reports that the Russians were paying bounties for the death of American military personnel in Afghanistan. That my goal is not to defend the intelligence community or to defend or criticize the president in this. It's rather to clarify from my perspective how the process is supposed to work, how the process typically does work, and in doing so to explain why much of the commentary is misleading. Why does it matter? As American taxpayers, we spend $80 billion a year on intelligence support to the policymaking process. So I think it's in the good government mode of understanding what we're paying for here. That unlike many of these webinars in this series, I'm not going to report on research results. As Mike indicated, I'm speaking out of both experience. The 4 years that I was in charge of the PDB made decisions on approximately 10,000 items. And during my time in the INR front office, staff calculated I am the signer approver on somewhere between 13,000 and 14,000 items. What do you tell the president? What do you tell cabinet secretaries? Or what do you tell others in the national security enterprise? How do we ensure that the right information gets to the right people in a timely fashion? That's really the bigger topic I wish to explore today. But let me make sure everybody's got a common baseline with respect to this reporting that the Russians paid the Taliban for the death of American service people. That this commentary has wrestled with the question of, did or didn't reports of this appear in the president's daily brief, or PDB? Did the president read it or didn't he? Whether he read it or not, did he act on it? Should he have acted on it? Was inclusion or exclusion, or the way it was presented, somehow influenced by the high-profile ongoing tension between the president and the intelligence community? Rejection of judgments made throughout his term by the intelligence community. That should, if it wasn't included, should it have been? Should the intelligence community had made sure that this got to the president? And if the IC judged that the president didn't act or didn't act appropriately, should it have done more about it? That's actually the observation and commentary I find most dismaying, because the relationship between intelligence and policymaking is one of support, to provide information and insights, to inform policy decisions, not to drive them, not to force policymakers to act in a particular way or to refrain from acting. That would cross the line between the provision of objective analysis, the best information we could come up with, and attempting to influence decisions that are appropriately made by elected and appointed and career national security officers. That much of this commentary, whichever side it comes down on, that it was all appropriate, it was all inappropriate, exaggerates the importance of the president's daily briefing. It's regularly described as the most important product of the intelligence community. It's for customer number one. That's true with a very large and bolded but. The president is important, but in our system, that position is not a single point of failure. It's not the gateway into all national security or even very many national security decisions. And the system and the relationship of the intelligence community to the policymakers is such that the PDB is one spot in a very large matrix of 24/7 dialogue and interaction between intelligence and policymaking. If something is truly important and truly urgent, nobody would wait until the morning briefing of the president to put it into the system. You'd call the National Security Advisor. You'd call somebody on the NSC staff. You'd speak with the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of State. It's not an unimportant document, but it's not only a document, it's also a process, and I'll describe that in a moment. I should make clear I have no inside information about this alleged reporting, about decisions that were made to include it and what to say about it. But I do know how the process is supposed to work. And I know that not simply from living it for a number of years, but because the current process, doubtless with some tweaks since I left, was designed by me when I became the Stuckey to implement the intelligence reform legislation of 2004, and making the President's Daily Brief a community product and changing the way it related to the larger system became one of my responsibilities. There has been a great deal of hand-wringing, criticism, finger pointing in general about whether the president does or doesn't read the PDB, whether he does or doesn't take the briefing, whether he takes it once or twice a week or every day. This will sound outrageous, but it doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter because of who the president is, but it doesn't matter because there are so many checks and redundancies in the system to make sure that there is no single point of failure. And simply as a matter of fact, as we teach every young analyst, one of the first things you need to learn about the people you are supporting is how do they like their information? Do they take it in through their eyes and they want to read it? Do they take it in through their ears and want to be briefed orally? Or do they take it in through trusted staff who monitors, summarizes, lets them know what they think they need to know? It appears that President Trump is more of the third type of reader of intelligence. The commentary also exaggerates the importance of getting information into the system by going to the president first. In my experience, the president is almost never the only one informed of something, and often is not the first one to be told about it. I'll come back to that point. The PDB as a product, that it's a document that typically has up to 10 short analytic pieces. The content of those pieces is tailored to the needs and interest of the incumbent president. It is the president's product. Different presidents have wanted different things, but it's keyed to the president's agenda, schedule. It's keyed to questions that the president has asked. Here's the response to your question. It provides regular updates to ongoing developments around the world involving US policy. And a small portion of it are heads up, alerts. So much writing about the intelligence community points to discovery of secrets and warning, and no more 9/11s, no more Pearl Harbors. One of the intriguing things is that study after study of intelligence failures running back to the pre-World War II era comes up with the same 12 or 13 examples. The reason I mention my own involvement in 23 or 24,000 pieces is that's a pretty small subset of what is presented day in and day out to let the process work. And on the whole, it works reasonably well. The president's briefing, that document, goes not just to the president. It goes to a small and select set of others, typically the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, maybe the Attorney General. Not a large number. and distribution is decided by the president or the president and the national security advisor. The reason for this are two. One is to provide a common baseline understanding of intelligence judgments about issues, developments that are likely to be on the agenda of senior level meetings. So there's a basic level of information. The second is so others will know what has been told to the president. So if they get a question, they get a request, they'll have some appreciation for where it is coming. When I worked for Secretary Powell, who I saw three times every day, I could be sure of at least once or twice a week getting a call from him that would begin with something like, "Do you know what they told the president today?" My response then was always, "No, I don't know what they told the president today," because as Assistant Secretary of State, I was not on the distribution list. After years of imploring, I finally managed to get the table of contents. So we would have an idea what was told. But this is tightly held. And among the reasons for it being tightly held, it's not that it, or not just that it contains sensitive information. It's an executive document of the president. That it is protected by the deliberative process cut out for declassification. That this has many reasons, but one of them is to reduce the likelihood of players on the Hill, inside the executive branch, or if it is leaked in some form to the media, demanding to know what the president has done about something that was reported in the intelligence briefing. Intelligence is supposed to inform. It's not to force action or a decision. And one of the things one learns, if you spend some time near the top of the system, is that on any given day, the United States wants to accomplish many, many goals around the world, and usually wants to accomplish multiple goals with a particular country. It's the policymakers that decide how to prioritize, when to do things, how to sequence. And it would be inappropriate for the intelligence community to tell them that the issue we have just analyzed or discovered should go to the top of the list. That's not a judgment on whether President Trump should or shouldn't have raised this with President Putin. I'm a little baffled by his decision not to for political reasons, but that's the policymaker's determination. If the president didn't see it, there are many others that can bring it to his attention. National Security Advisor, the deputy, cabinet secretaries who go to NSC meetings, and the NSC schedule is one of the shapers of content in the PDB. But again, a reminder on our system. Most issues do not make it to the top of the US political system, including most national security questions. The bias, the structure of our system is to resolve issues as low in the system as possible. If you can do it in an embassy, you can do it at a country desk, you can do it at a regional affairs organization, you do it. If it bumps up to an assistant secretary, undersecretary, or cabinet secretary, that's where it gets taken care of. You only go to the president when you've got something that is so divisive, so contentious, so resource demanding that you can't work it out at a lower level. So most intelligence goes into the system with lower level participants who work it directly and work it up their own chains of command and bring it to the attention of the National Security Council, National Security Advisor, the president, as they think necessary. They conclude with some remarks about what do you say? It's one thing to decide what do you put in this limited content briefing. Judging on what is most important is different than what is most important to bring to the president's attention right now. And those are human decisions. There's no algorithm, there's no automaticity in the process that tells you what to do. The overall goal was to provide timely and tailored intelligence report. One size fits nobody in terms of providing intelligence support to the policymaking process. To make some obvious points, what the Secretary of State needs is very different than what the Commandant of the Marine Corps needs, what the Secretary of Treasury needs, what a Deputy in Health and Human Services needs. They may all involve Russia or China or Poland or something else, but they need different information on different dimensions of the relationship. So decisions about what to present are based very much on continuous interaction with the people that are being supported. Constant dialogue to know what, in my case for many years, the Secretary of State wanted to know, what he said he needed to know, what I thought he needed to know, or she, since I worked for 2 female Secretaries of State. What do they need to know in order to deal with the problems that they have prioritized in there? So you're not guessing. It's not the problem we have in academia where you do very good work, you find the answer to a problem, you get an insight to the issue, and have no idea how to get it into the system. And even less idea how to get it into the right people at the right time. That's the insider information that the intelligence community has and utilizes. But what do you say? And how do you present it? That there are 2 polar opposites that are used to characterize behavior of intelligence analysts. One, the criticism leveled after 9/11 was that analysts were too cautious. They lacked imagination. They leaned too far back, wanting to have more evidence, more confidence, and didn't alert people as soon as they should have. That changed the mindset. It changed some rules and procedures. And we got the Iraq WMD fiasco. Analysts implored to lean forward. Throw everything in the kitchen sink that you've got into the mix without taking the time to determine reliability, implications, logical underpinnings of the analysis. So you go back and forth between the academic instinct to wait until you've got all the information, till you've got it right, till you've got high confidence to present to the system. And the warning function of intelligence was to alert people while there's still time to do something, to try and change the trajectory of events. And again, there's no magic formula. You rely on experience, you rely on collaboration, you rely on dialogue with policy people, and frankly, you rely on making mistakes and getting smacked because you were either too early or too late. One of the often explicit, always implicit questions or sets of questions in dealing with policymakers and bringing them information, good news or bad news, is, can I do anything about this? Answer is, that's your decision. We don't make recommendations. Do I have to do anything about this? Again, that's your policy decision. Do I have to do anything about it now? Again, your policy decision. Where it comes back to the intelligence community is, if we do X, how do you think it'll work out? What will be the impact on target country or problem and third countries? So figuring out what to say, figuring out when you're confident enough to present it is shaped in part by large atmospherics, in part by schedule-driven. Decisions don't wait. If the president's being briefed going into a meeting or for a phone call, you can't say, tell the Chancellor of Germany to wait. We need a little more time to work out this analysis. That the pace is unrelenting. So you give it your best shot at the time. And the obligation is to make as clear as possible what you know, what you don't know, where the gaps are, what the assumptions and the analogies you're using to fill those gaps, to make clear the level of confidence that you have, to, in essence, put a big yellow flag up there that say, this is our judgment, but the ice under this is pretty thin. Before you commit the United States or your political future to it, you need to be aware that we're pretty uncertain about this. You wanted our best shot, here it is. The final point, truly final point, is telling truth to power, pandering to get back in the good graces of the policy counterparts, politicization of the process. These are my experience over it's now 50 years that I've held clearances, is that these are far more theoretical or hypothetical problems than they are in reality. The professionalism, the ethos, the rules that govern the behavior of people in the intelligence community really do guide behavior. Most policymakers recognize that it's counterproductive to try and persuade a stubborn analyst to skew findings in order to please a political appointee, and they don't do it. Things seem to be different in this administration in that regard. But by law, I had to make an annual report to the Congress about instances of attempted politicization. And we did a 100% survey of intelligence analysts and asked, have you experienced any attempt for political reasons to change your judgment? Second was, do you know of any instances involving other people? Third question, do you know of any instances in which it was successful? And each of the years that I had to submit this report as the Deputy Director of National Intelligence, you could count the total number of reported instances of attempted politicization on the fingers of both hands. And you could count the number that anybody thought had been effective on one hand. This is not a major problem. The integrity of the process is quite good. Let me close by saying I look forward to Amy's questions and questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. You've given a tremendous overview of the process, and it's a process that most people don't have real insight to. So let me just backtrack for a second and say, I feel bad that Mike has given me all this credit for great titles of my books, and I have to share with everybody what I share with Mike, which is I didn't come up with my titles. I bribed people to come up with titles by offering them a good dinner. So so it's not my doing. Tom, you and I have been talking about intelligence for a long time. And so I want to start with history that you know well, but I want to get your perspective about this history for the audience. Most presidents are frustrated with their intelligence agencies, right? This war with Donald Trump and the intelligence community may be extreme, but is not new, right? Nixon famously said, what do those clowns do out at Langley? You know, Kennedy distrusted his CIA director so much they nearly missed the Soviet buildup in Cuba in 1962. Poor James Woolsey, right? You know, the joke in Washington when the small plane crashed on the White House lawn, everyone joked it was the CIA director, Jim Woolsey, trying to get a meeting with the president. So that's not new. So help us walk through the enduring sources of friction between presidents and their intelligence agencies. What's enduring? What are the root causes of that friction? And then what, if anything, is different about this president and this administration?
Yeah, well, these are questions that will not get adequate treatment in the short answer that I will provide. But there is a structural dimension to this, that presidents and administrations come into office with agendas that they wish to pursue and programs they wish to implement. They all prefer success to failure. One of the realities of the intelligence world is you report bad news. not every program, not every policy is completely successful. And that feeds into a situation in which most programs, platforms, undertakings are controversial. So the intelligence community saying this was less than a complete success because that reignites debates often within the administration, between the administrative, the executive branch, and the legislative branch, occasionally with previous administrations on the right course of action. That I wish I had $1 for every time a senior official said to me some variant of, "Can't you ever bring me good news? All you bring me are problems." So that is a inherent dimension of it. The other contributing factor is the intelligence community is too gun shy about identifying opportunities for policymakers to make a difference. You always tell me are problems once you identify opportunities. That's perfectly reasonable. But identifying opportunities skates pretty close to the line in the injunction against recommending courses of action. And most analysts will pull back from that. You're more likely to get in hot water for appearing to push a policy preference than you are for reporting bad news.
So let me follow up on that. You've talked a lot about the line that intelligence is not policymaking, but it's a contact sport, right? So explain to everyone why intelligence officials feel so strongly that intelligence should not cross the line into policymaking, because there's a long history there and there are good reasons why that is. And what moments in your long career gave you the most heartburn about coming up to that line?
Okay. The reason the line looms so brightly and so large is there are three things that distinguish the intelligence community from every other contributor to the policymaking process. From within the bureaucracy, from within staff on the Hill, from think tanks, from university classmates, from journalists, from foreign missions, everybody's got input. Everyone is assumed to also have an agenda for which they're bringing this input. The intelligence community, the three things that it has that make it unique. One is the inside knowledge of timing, of what officials are trying to do, when they're trying to do it, what they know, what they want to know, what you think they need to know in order to accomplish their goals. Everybody else is guessing. There's no excuse for not knowing it if you're in the intelligence community. The second is more information. The intelligence community has access to all the information available to anything else, plus a tremendous capacity to go after other information, clandestinely, covertly, and in other ways, or to follow up. It's an interesting article that appears in a Kenyan newspaper. You can call the embassy and have them go talk to the journalist who produced it and get more information in a hurry. The third is objectivity. The perception of being objective, or the most objective contributor to the process, that doesn't have a personal agenda, isn't skewing the data in order to advance that agenda, is an advantage that both policymakers and intel analysts really want to protect.
So, Tom, you've also talked about technology and the availability of information. But we know that that information ecosystem is dramatically different today than even 5 years ago. So, especially with the sort of proliferation of social media, online capabilities, you can track people, parents tracking their teenagers on their cell phones all over the place. In this information ecosystem, how is that challenging the competitive landscape for intelligence, where information is going directly into policymakers' hands? And as you say, it's less objective, it's often more incorrect. but they're timely, right? So bloggers and others really care about being fast, not necessarily being right. And it's going right into the cell phones of leaders today. How has that changing ecosystem affected what the intelligence community is doing?
Well, this administration, this president, kind of underscored that in spades. That he gets information from wherever he gets it from. And one of the first lessons I always try to pound into the head of analysts was, if you misinform a policymaker, it's really hard to knock the erroneous idea out of the head, especially if they've spoken or acted on it. That you may realize you prematurely made input into the process. And this is part of the lean back till you're confident and you've got it right. Because if you're too aggressive, too uncertain, or fail to caveat properly, you get it in the head of a leader who's got to do something or thinks he might have to do something. And another source of tension between presidents and the intelligence community is congressional oversight. That far more information is provided in the executive branch than it is to the Congress, because Congress can't handle it. It's not a limited, other than capacity to handle it. But when something like here, whatever the report was about Russian involvement with the Taliban, that would have been briefed to the Hill. And the Hill would want to know what you're doing about it, what is being done about it. And the flow of information that comes in through traditional media, let alone social media, traditional media, the intelligence community usually has a pretty good idea what's coming, right? So you try to get out in front by calling up journalists to help them to get it right, by doing a heads up in the PDB or other sources that said, this is what's going to be in the press. Here's what's right, here's what we think is wrong about it, because that's what's going to be read by ordinary Americans who are going to feed it into their members of Congress, who are going to come back and ask about it. So there is a loop there that makes it imperative to reach judgments in the intelligence community more quickly than in the past. Simply to be on top of the problem. The other is the sheer volume. While we have been doing this webinar, the United States intelligence community collected a volume of information larger than the total holdings of the Stanford Library. You can't go looking around randomly for interesting needles in this enormous haystack. You've got to search for information pegged to what's the question you're trying to answer? What's the question you need to answer? What's the question, if you can answer, will give you the most insight? And you need to use machines smartly. That can't be done all by human beings. You've got to use keywords and a lot of other technical means to make it manageable.
Well, we have a number of questions that people have asked that have sent in, so I want to make sure we have time to get to some of them. I'll just remind everyone, if you have a question, just type it out in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So one of the questions gets to something you said, Tom, about should the intelligence community have done more, that's one of the criticisms that's unfair with the Russian bounty story. And you've noted that the IC intelligence community plays a supporting role. But what if the president mischaracterizes the intelligence? What if the president says things that are not true in the best judgments of, based on evidence, not only of the community, but of the country? What responsibility, if any, do intelligence officials have then?
Yeah, this is a terribly important and a tough question that particularly when it's the president, that when policymakers, up to and including the president, mischaracterize the judgments of the intelligence community, there's a professional obligation to point that out. But the way in which you point it out The intelligence community doesn't go to the media. It shouldn't. I mean, one of the appalling things about the last 4 years is the intelligence community is far more in the media than I believe it should be, on far more subjects than it should be. But calling it to the attention of other U.S. officials, including in the legislative branch. It's not exactly whistleblowing, but it is. Dan Coates, Jim Clapper, as directors of national intelligence, using testimony, statements for the record in the Congress as a part of the annual threat testimony that disagreed with characterizations made by the president. That's their obligation, a professional responsibility to do. In a memorable instance with John Bolton, when he was Undersecretary of State, he was angry with me because one of my people wouldn't approve a speech that he wanted to give. And John's position was, I am the president's appointee, I get to say what I want to say. So John, that's absolutely right. But if you say the intelligence community thinks X and we don't think X, we have a responsibility to point that out. I'm pointing it out to you now before you make that statement, because you could be pretty sure if you make that statement, a senior official, another policy official in the Department of State is going to call you on this publicly. That tends to complicate relationships. Some people are highly appreciative when you save them from mistakes, and others are not. One of the ones that is both a positive and a negative. I have a publicly identified with the 2007 estimate on Iran's nuclear intentions and capability, highly, highly controversial estimate that paved the way for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was reached in the Obama administration. Basically concluded that Iran might be prepared to negotiate controls on its nuclear program. And we had changed the judgment. A member of Congress demanded, why should I believe you? Why should I trust you? You changed your mind. I said, sir, you should believe me, believe us, precisely because we did change our mind when the evidence showed that we were wrong. And there were lots of public excoriation and lots of media characterization as the intelligence community in general and Finger in particular as being an enemy of George Bush and the Bush administration and its policy. And the gratifying part of this, the president telling me I'd done a fantastic job and ignored the criticism. And the intellectual integrity that came through in that was, I thought, quite striking. So
we have a bunch of questions, Tom, about Congress and congressional oversight. So I want to try to bring them all together in a more structured way. So first part, you mentioned that Congress can't handle being briefed to the same degree as the executive branch. So talk about what does get briefed to Congress. Mm-hmm. And secondly, a question from Roger George, is congressional oversight broken? And if it is, what can be done about it?
Yeah. Partly the challenges of congressional oversight are compounded by the information explosion that you mentioned earlier, by the number of issues in the national security bucket being so large here. The number of members of Congress who are interested and able to serve on intelligence committees, armed services committee, foreign affairs committee is small. There's in the intelligence, there's not much money to be distributed. There's a lot of money in the intelligence budget, but it's not as susceptible to political allocation. The best explanation for why so few members chose to be in this area came from a former Ryan Agarth, who was the congressman from the Princeton area, Rush Holt. And he said the biggest difference is every other committee, every other subject for oversight, you get more help than you can handle from K Street, from the academic world, from media, that feeds you ideas, feeds you information. Because intelligence is classified, and because the staff that is cleared is very small, you've got to do all the work yourself. And finding the time in a busy congressional day to go down to another part of the Capitol to read or listen to classified information and to dialogue about it, and to find somebody else in the Congress to dialogue about it to see if you've got it right, is a tremendous constraint. So I think there's less congressional oversight than there should be. That I remember saying was I was responding to a question in advance of a confirmation hearing. I was both a Clinton appointee and a Bush appointee. This was for the Bush confirmation. That, what do you think about congressional oversight? And my response was, I wish I had some. And that wasn't the expected question. I said, no, I'm absolutely serious. That we do our work, we feed it into the executive branch, which comes at it from the perspective of the executive branch program. You're the only other source of constructive criticism. You're the only other one that could tell us whether we are meeting your requirements for understanding these issues. And you spend all your time on the big ticket programs that fly around in exotic collectors up in space, doing fiduciary responsibility and not reading my analytic products. And that is simply a reality, and it limits the ability of Congress. Before ending on this question, I was bemused at the congressional reaction of some members of Congress to the reports of bounties being offered. And it has all of the outrage, the feigned outrage of, what? There's gambling going on in that casino? There have been public reports for at least 4 years of Russian support and assistance to the Taliban. Maybe there's a difference between providing weapons and saying shoot them, but it's pretty bizarre to me. This is not a new issue. And it raises another of the challenges for the intelligence community. How often do you call attention to a development? Without falling into the old Saturday Night Live bit on Franco is still dead. And they reported every week that Franco was still dead. And the executive branch immediately reacts that there's nothing new in your judgment. Why are you repeating it? Why are you repeating it again to congressional committees? Are you trying to make us do something that we are not yet prepared to do? And it's a fair question.
We could go on oversight, since that's the chapter I'm writing now, but in the interest of time and the interest of people who have lots of other questions, we'll move on. So a number of questions about politicization in this administration. And I want to add a layer to that, which is that in this era, one of the other differences is that retired intelligence officials are speaking out in public more than they have in the past. So you have John Brennan, perhaps most in public on his Twitter feed and going after the president in some very personal ways. But other members of the retired members of the intelligence community, leaders, have been much more vocal now than they have been in the past. Do you think, number one, that this is appropriate? And number two, will it have any kind of lasting effects, positive or negative, on the relationship between policymakers and the intelligence community?
Yeah, I hesitate to make a pronouncement on appropriateness. I mean, these are individual decisions. I have made the individual decision to stay quiet on a lot of things. Sort of my view of the intelligence policy relationship. But I completely understand how, as well-informed, highly experienced American citizens who know the challenges of national security, of governance, being worried, greatly worried by the actions of this administration. As Americans, not as intelligence community professionals, and feeling an obligation to speak out because they are better informed than most Americans are, that their arguments should have more weight, and that guys like Finger that stay silent are cowardly in there. I completely understand both sides of that argument. I don't think it'll be a lasting problem. I think it's a problem that can be overcome with something like restoration of the normal intelligence policy relationship and different personalities. But it's, I think, linked to the far larger number of instances of lower level people in the intelligence community speaking out. Some by name, some in the form of, can only be called leaks. They're not divulging classified information, but they're playing in the political arena in ways that I think is bad, is very bad for the objectivity and perceived objectivity and independence of the intelligence community. And I don't know how much has to happen before this begins to look like it's an acceptable behavior.
Hmm. There have been a couple of questions about COVID, since we're of course all zooming in from various places because we can't actually meet in Encina Hall. And this gives the opportunity to talk about the difference between warning and action, Tom. So the question was, were policymakers sufficiently warned about COVID-19? And I want to give you the chance to talk about, if they were sufficiently warned, then what's the problem and how do you separate warning from action? Because I think that's an area that you know a lot about and people often don't think about it.
Yeah. This turns out to be an opportunity to brag a little bit, actually. That in 2008, as the chairman of the National Intelligence Council, I was in charge of that installment of Global Trends that looks out 15 years, and they're timed to come out at the start of each new administration or re-elected administration. And in the one we did in 2008 that looked out 15 years, one of the scenarios that we used to focus thought, that I'm not predicting this is going to happen, but here are the kind of things that we ought to be doing to prepare for it. One of them was a coronavirus outbreak that began in central China. It's 2008. I briefed that to President-elect Obama, among other things, before Thanksgiving. So between the election and his inauguration. And I'm not going to go into details of my conversation with him, but one of the follow-on was the creation, or the recreation, modification, because it existed in the Bush administration, of a White House-based group set of procedures to manage a pandemic. It was in place, and it did, from my perspective, improve the one that I was involved with in the Bush administration. It was abolished in the Trump administration. And the idea of all of this, take alerting to identify who are the institutions that must play a role in managing it. Who are the individuals that need to be in contact with one another? How do you build the Rolodex of contacts, the email network, the identification of people at lower levels of our federal system? And alerting should lead to that kind of preparation to add to resilience. May also reduce vulnerability, but should add to resilience and recovery. That's a useful form of warning and alerting. the kind that I want to make sure I got this thing absolutely right. It's like the old Bill Cosby joke about where they put dip signs in San Francisco, so that by the time you saw the sign saying dip ahead, you'd hit it. That it's got to be in time to take action. And that usually means a long lead time. And that usually means taking action on the basis of pretty mixed confidence to not low confidence judgments. It's how much of an insurance policy do you think we need?
I think it's important for our listeners also to understand that intelligence officials could warn, and the warning could be done with high confidence, with lots of time, but it's up to policymakers to act for that. And so it looks like a warning failure. And you could imagine, for example, some responses to COVID look like warning failures, when in fact they were policy failures. Policymakers were warned, but they didn't do anything about it. Why do they not have masks in Georgia now with 150,000 deaths? It's not a warning failure, right? It's a policy failure. And so I think that's an important component.
And one of the things you learn early on in Washington and the intelligence communities, there's only two possibilities. There are policy successes and intelligence failures.
I can't end on that depressing a note, Tom. So I want to ask you to leave us with more optimism. What do you think is the most promising part of what intelligence officials are doing now? What makes you, not what keeps you up at night, what makes you sleep easy at night with what intelligence folks are doing?
Well, I continue to be impressed by the capability and professionalism of those in the intelligence community. I know the analytic portion of it best. That's where I spent my career. But these are highly trained, dedicated professionals that when I moved from Stanford to the State Department in 1986, for quite a while I got questions from friends back here about how was I adjusting to the change, the move from the high intellectual capability of my colleagues at Stanford into the dumb bureaucracy. And it's not a dumb bureaucracy, particularly in the national security arena. That when I was the Assistant Secretary of INO, I had give or take 160 analysts. Give or take 130 of those were PhDs. The rest were, JDs, ABDs, MAs, and they had years or decades of experience at what they did. The commitment to the country, the patriotism, the commitment to analytic rigor, the willingness to incur the anger of political appointees or other policymakers to stand up for what's right, I think is something of which we can all be very proud. And it makes me confident about our future.
Couldn't end on a better note. On a Friday afternoon where people can now go and have their happy hour in their backyard, socially distanced. Tom, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk shop with you. Thanks everybody for joining us on Zoom. Look forward to seeing you all back in person on campus sometime.
And thank you, Amy, and thank you all for tuning in.